You're in HOA territory now. The rules are different here. Marcus Washington looked at the man in the fake uniform standing next to his car window and almost laughed. Almost. Because this wasn't funny. This was racial profiling dressed up as neighborhood enforcement. What Richard Pemberton and Bill Reynolds didn't know? Marcus was a state trooper. He knew the law. He'd been recording everything. And he was about to dismantle their entire corrupt HOA empire. One fake traffic stop. 2 racist enforcers. 15 years of hidden discrimination. This is how it all came crashing down. The red and orange lights flickering in his rearview mirror made Marcus Washington's jaw tighten. Not because he was worried. He'd done nothing wrong. But because he recognized exactly what this was. Harassment. Marcus had only been living in Cedar Grove Heights for 3 weeks. Moving into his late grandmother's house after she passed. Leaving him the modest 2-story home she'd lived in for 40 years. He'd taken a transfer to the state police barracks nearby, thinking it would be a fresh start, a quiet neighborhood where he could rebuild after his divorce. Instead, he'd found Cedar Grove Heights. Behind him, a modified golf cart painted to look like a security vehicle wobbled down the street, its amateur light bar spinning dramatically. The vehicle had HOA Patrol emblazoned on the side in bold, official-looking letters. Behind the wheel sat a stocky white man in his 50s wearing aviator sunglasses, a tan uniform shirt with patches, and the kind of self-satisfied smirk that Marcus had seen 1,000 times in his 15-year career. The kind of smirk that said, "I've got power here, and you don't." Marcus pulled his charcoal gray Dodge Charger, his personal vehicle, not his patrol car, to the side of Cedar Grove Lane right in front of his own driveway. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, a habit born from too many stories of traffic stops gone wrong. Even though he knew this wasn't even a real traffic stop. The golf cart pulled up behind him, and out stepped the man in the tan uniform. Following close behind was another man, tall and thin with silver hair, wearing khaki pants and a navy blazer despite the California heat. This man carried a clipboard and wore an expression of barely concealed disdain. Marcus watched them approach in his side mirror. The stocky man, his uniform said B. Reynolds, HOA Enforcement, walked with an exaggerated swagger, hand resting on what looked like a radio on his belt. The thin man stayed slightly behind, observing. When they reached his window, Marcus calmly rolled it down halfway. "License and registration," Reynolds barked without preamble. Not even a good afternoon or explanation. Marcus kept his voice level and professional. "Can you tell me what this is regarding?" "I said license and registration. Now." Reynolds tapped the roof of Marcus's car with his knuckles, a power move, a claim of dominance. The thin man stepped forward, his voice cold and clipped. "I'm Richard Pemberton, president of the Cedar Grove Heights Homeowners Association. You were driving 32 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour zone. You also failed to come to a complete stop at the stop sign on Willow and Cedar Grove." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. He'd been going exactly 25. He'd stopped completely at that sign. But more importantly, the HOA doesn't have traffic enforcement authority, Marcus said calmly. Richard Pemberton's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Within Cedar Grove Heights, we most certainly do. It's in the CC&Rs you agreed to when you moved in here." The pause before those last words carried a weight Marcus recognized immediately. "When you moved into our neighborhood. When you, a black man, dared to live here." Marcus had dealt with men like Richard Pemberton and Bill Reynolds before, men who found a tiny sliver of authority and wielded it like a weapon, especially against people who looked like him. But this was different. This was his grandmother's neighborhood, the place where she'd lived for 4 decades, enduring who knows what kind of treatment from these same people. And that's when Pemberton said it, leaning slightly closer to the window. "You're in HOA territory now. The rules are different here." Marcus looked at the fake uniform, the plastic badge, the clipboard with its official-looking letterhead. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Almost. Because there was nothing funny about what was happening. This was racism with a paper trail. Discrimination dressed up in bureaucratic language and fake authority. And these 2 men had no idea who they were dealing with. What they didn't know was that Marcus Washington wasn't just a resident. He was a California state trooper with 15 years of experience. He knew every law they were breaking. He'd already started recording, the moment he saw the golf cart's illegal lights in his mirror, and he was about to dismantle everything they'd built. Marcus had dealt with men like Richard Pemberton and Bill Reynolds. Before, men who found a tiny sliver of authority and wielded it like a weapon, especially against people who looked like him. "I'm going to need to see your identification," Reynolds repeated, His hand now hovering near what Marcus could now see was just a flashlight on his belt, positioned to look like a weapon. We have the authority to issue citations, fines, and impound vehicles in violation of HOA regulations. No, you don't, Marcus replied evenly. The HOA can fine homeowners for property violations. You cannot conduct traffic stops, you cannot impound vehicles, and you definitely cannot impersonate law enforcement officers. Reynolds' face flushed red. I'm not impersonating. The lights on your golf cart, the uniform, the demands for license and registration, that's impersonation. Marcus kept his voice calm, but he let a hint of steel enter it. California Vehicle Code Section 27605 makes it illegal to operate red or blue lights, unless you're an authorized emergency vehicle. You're also in violation of Penal Code Section 538D. Pemberton held up a hand, stopping Reynolds from responding. His smile grew colder. Mr. Washington, is it? I've done my research on you since you moved into Mrs. Washington's property. You've been, let's say, resistant to Cedar Grove height standards from day one. I've followed every rule, Marcus said. Your grass was 1/4 inch above regulation height last Tuesday. You parked your vehicle on the street overnight on Thursday instead of in your garage. Your garbage cans were visible from the street for 7 minutes past the 7 a.m. collection deadline. Pemberton read from his clipboard. Each violation carries a $250 fine. You currently owe us $750. Marcus stared at them. This was insane. This was also deliberate. I've seen your type before. Pemberton continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think you can move into a nice neighborhood like this and just exist here without following the standards that made this community what it is? Your grandmother understood her place. She kept her head down, paid her fines, never caused trouble. Perhaps you should follow her example. The mask had slipped. There it was, the ugly truth beneath the bureaucratic language and fake authority. Marcus felt his anger rising but kept it controlled. 15 years as a state trooper had taught him patience, had taught him to recognize when someone was trying to provoke a reaction they could use against him. Am I free to go? Marcus asked. After you pay your fines and sign this citation, Reynolds said, pulling out a booklet of carbonless forms that looked like they came from an office supply store. I'm not paying anything. And I'm not signing anything. Pemberton leaned down to the window, his face inches from Marcus's. Then you're in violation of HOA enforcement cooperation statutes. We'll be forced to place a lien on your property. We can also have your vehicle towed for obstruction of HOA operations. Marcus had reached his limit. He slowly reached toward his glove compartment, making sure his movements were visible and deliberate. Reynolds immediately tensed, his hand moving to his flashlight. Easy there, Reynolds said. Keep your hands where I can see them. I'm retrieving my identification, which you demanded, Marcus said calmly. He pulled out his wallet and held it up, flipping it open. The California Highway Patrol badge gleamed in the afternoon sun. I'm Officer Marcus Washington. California Highway Patrol, badge number 4127, assigned to the State Police Barracks on Highway 101. 15 years of service. He kept his voice professional, but there was no missing the authority in it now. And you two just committed multiple felonies in front of a law enforcement officer. The color drained from Bill Reynolds' face. Richard Pemberton's expression barely changed, but Marcus saw his fingers tighten on the clipboard. That doesn't change, Pemberton started. It changes everything, Marcus interrupted. You're operating emergency lights illegally. You're impersonating law enforcement. You've conducted an illegal traffic stop. You've made false accusations and attempted to extort money under color of authority. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling this in right now. Real police, not fake HOA security. We'll be here in 5 minutes to arrest you both. Reynolds took a stumbling step backward. Wait, we didn't know. We were just enforcing HOA regulations. You were targeting me because I'm black, Marcus said flatly. You've been harassing me since the day I moved in. The grass height, the garbage cans, the parking. None of that is real. You're inventing violations to make me feel unwelcome. That's housing discrimination, and it's a federal crime. Pemberton finally showed a crack in his composure. You can't prove that. I document everything, Marcus said. He held up his phone, showing he'd been recording since before they approached. I have video of you conducting an illegal traffic stop. I have your admission that you've been monitoring me specifically. I have you threatening to place a lien on my property over invented violations. And I have you telling me I should know my place like my grandmother did. The silence stretched out. In the distance, Marcus could hear the approaching sirens. He'd actually texted his partner at the barracks before pulling over. anticipating this might escalate. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said. "You're going to be arrested. I'm going to file a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office about HOA discrimination. And then we're going to have a very long conversation about every fine you've issued in this neighborhood for the last 5 years." The arrest of Richard Pemberton and Bill Reynolds sent shockwaves through Cedar Grove Heights. What Marcus discovered in the investigation that followed was worse than he'd imagined. Working with the State Attorney General's office and the Department of Fair Housing, Marcus helped uncover a systematic pattern of discrimination. The HOA had been targeting minority residents for years with invented violations, excessive fines, and harassment disguised as community standards enforcement. Mrs. Chen, an elderly Chinese woman on Maple Street, had been fined $12,000 over 3 years for unauthorized garden decorations, traditional Chinese lanterns she hung during festivals. The Johnsons, a black family on Oak Avenue, had been hit with $8,000 in fines for their son's basketball hoop, citing visual blight despite similar hoops in white residents' driveways being ignored. The Martinez family faced constant citations for having too many vehicles when they had the same number as their neighbors. The pattern was clear and documented. Pemberton had weaponized the HOA against anyone who didn't fit his vision of Cedar Grove Heights, which apparently meant anyone who wasn't white, but it went deeper than discrimination. The investigation revealed financial fraud. Pemberton had been pocketing portions of the collected fines, using HOA funds for personal expenses, and had hired his brother-in-law's company for unnecessary emergency repairs at inflated prices. Reynolds, it turned out, wasn't just a racist enforcer. He was on probation for a prior conviction of impersonating an officer in another county. The fake HOA patrol operation had been Pemberton's pet project, funded by resident dues but operating entirely outside any legal authority. The golf cart, the uniforms, the citation booklets, all paid for with homeowner money to create an intimidation force that targeted people Pemberton wanted gone. Marcus sat in the community center for the emergency HOA meeting 3 weeks after the arrests. The room was packed. Residents he'd never met came up to shake his hand, apologize for not speaking up sooner, share their own stories of HOA harassment. "I was afraid to say anything," Mrs. Chen told him, her eyes glistening. "I thought if I complained they would take my house." That was exactly what Pemberton had wanted. Fear. Compliance control. The meeting was called to order by Sarah Mitchell, a white woman in her 40s who'd been elected emergency interim president after Pemberton's arrest. She looked genuinely shaken by what had been uncovered. "We have a lot to answer for," she began. "As a community, we allowed this to happen. We need to do better." 6 months later, Cedar Grove Heights looked different. Not physically. The houses were the same, the streets unchanged. But the atmosphere had transformed. The HOA had been completely restructured. New bylaws explicitly prohibited discrimination and limited enforcement to actual property maintenance issues, not arbitrary aesthetic judgments. Fines were capped and required board approval. The fake patrol program was disbanded, and all previous discriminatory fines were refunded with interest. Richard Pemberton and Bill Reynolds faced criminal charges. Pemberton was convicted of fraud, embezzlement, civil rights violations, and impersonating law enforcement authority. Reynolds received charges for false impersonation and criminal conspiracy. Both faced significant prison time, but more importantly, the community began to heal. Marcus organized a neighborhood barbecue in his grandmother's backyard. His backyard now. Mrs. Chen brought homemade dumplings. The Martinez family brought carne asada. The Johnsons set up their speaker system. White neighbors who'd been silent during the harassment showed up with apologies and potluck dishes, genuinely trying to make amends. It wasn't perfect. Some residents moved out, unable to face their complicity in the discrimination. Others remained defensive, insisting they never knew what was happening. But enough people wanted to do better, wanted to build something healthier. Sarah Mitchell approached Marcus at the barbecue. The board voted unanimously. "We'd like to offer you a position, community liaison, paid role. Make sure we never go back to what we were." Marcus considered it. "Only if we expanded. Not just me watching you. Create a diverse residents committee with real authority to challenge board decisions." "Done," Sarah said immediately. "Marcus, thank you. You could have just reported this and moved away. Instead, you stayed and fought to fix it." Marcus looked around at his neighbors, people who'd been afraid to speak, people who'd been targeted, people who'd been complicit, and people who genuinely wanted change. This was his community now. His grandmother had endured decades of subtle and not-so-subtle racism to keep her home. He wouldn't dishonor her memory by running from the fight. Someone once told me, Marcus said, that you can't fix systems from the outside. You have to be willing to do the work where you are. He thought about that traffic stop 6 months ago, about Pemberton's smirk, Reynolds's fake badge, the assumption that Marcus would be too afraid or powerless to fight back. They'd been wrong about who had the real authority, and Cedar Grove, Heights, was finally learning what that authority should actually protect. Not power, not exclusivity, not racial hierarchy. Just people trying to live in peace in their own homes.